So today I'm going to go over an introduction of the spinal cord. I'm just going through and talking about some of the overview, main highlights of the spinal cord, and as we go throughout the week, we'll get a little bit more in depth. All right, so a general overview of the spinal cord. Obviously, we know it's made up of nervous tissue and it's found within protective membranes. It's encased in the vertebral column, which protects it. The main function here of the spinal cord is to carry sensory and motor information between the brain and other parts of the body. It's a major reflex center, so when we talk about reflexes here in a couple of days, you'll see how different regions of the body reflex based on stimulus brought onto it. And again, you can see here it extends from the foramen magnum, which is in the bottom part of the skull here, to the first lumbar, where it ends just below the ribs. So this is a little bit more detail as far as the spinal cord goes. The adult spinal cord is approximately 45 centimeters in length, or just over 18 inches long. You can see the width is about 14 millimeters. So if you take a look at your thumb, that's about how wide it is. Now, if you really have really small thumbs, it might be a little bit wider than that. The regions are broken up into 4 different regions. You have your cervical, your thoracic, your lumbar, and your sacral. And those kind of correlate to the backbone as far as when we talk about that. As far as the spinal cord itself, it still contains both gray and white matter, which we'll talk about here in a minute. There are 31 pairs of spinal nerves that arise from the spinal cord, and those go in correlation to regions of the body. And we'll talk about that again here in a minute. And it's protected by this case called the meninges. And again, there's different parts of that, which we'll get into here in a second. All right, so just kind of continuation about the spinal cord. This thing will continue to enlarge until about 4 years of age. When you get about 4 years old, it's going to kind of, I don't want to say stop, because it still branches, but as far as the maximal length, that's about when it happens. The quada equina is a collection of spinal nerves at the inferior end of the vertebral canal. So you can see that in the picture over there on the left, that last little thing there on the left. And again, you can kind of see how it branches out, and so that's why they say it kind of looks like a horse's tail. So the spinal nerves, they're sensory and motor nerves that are bound together. They form into a single nerve. And of these nerves, they have these different branches or nerve fibers, and they're called rami communicants. And you have both white and gray ramus communicants. They are mixed nerves based on what type of fiber they contain, whether it's afferent or efferent fibers. And remember the difference between the two as far as whether they're being carried away or toward the skull. And again, we said they have 31 pairs of these spinal nerves, and they're named for what region of the body they most come in contact with. As far as protection goes of the spinal cord, we know that one of the first defenses of the spinal cord is obviously the backbone that protects it, that vertebral column. But inside, there's this thing called the meninges, which is going to surround that spinal cord. It's kind of like a casing for it. And again, it provides the necessary physical stability and the shock absorptions for the actual spine. Within that thing, there are different blood vessels branching that we're going to provide nutrients and deliver the oxygen to the spinal cord. And there are 3 different layers. We have the dura mater, the arachnoid mater, and the pia mater. Okay, so we're going to take a little bit closer look at the 3 different layers. The first one we have is the dura mater, which is that tough fibrous layer, and it's the outermost layer. If you look towards the bottom of the diagram on the far right, you can see where the dura mater is. Again, that's on the outside. The arachnoid mater is the middle layer here. It contains the epithelium called the arachnoid membrane, which again is just a combination of the collagen and elastic fibers. If you've ever heard of a spinal tap or somebody having to get a spinal tap, typically this is what where the needle will get injected to, and that's where they're trying to remove some of that spinal fluid. And the last type we have is that pia mater. That pia mater is the innermost layer. Again, it's consisting of elastic and collagen fibers. and it's bound to that nervous tissue underneath. So you can kind of see the different areas of that in a actual section of a spinal cord. So let's take a look at the difference between the gray and the white matter as far as the spinal cord goes. Remember from earlier the difference between the white and the gray matter. With white matter, we have large numbers of myelinated and unmyelinated axons. And with the gray matter, you can see it's dominated by cell bodies of neurons, neuroglia, and unmyelinated axons. So looking at the gray matter first, you can see in the diagram over there on the right, it kind of forms an H pattern, or they say it's a butterfly shape. The gray matter has sides on the end called the horns. You can see these horns in the picture where you see the dorsal horn over there on the left side. And again, there's just different regions on there as far as where the spinal cord is. And we have different types. We have the posterior horns, we have the anterior horns, and we have the lateral horns. And again, the spinal cord is really, really organized. And because it's so organized, if there is ever damage to the spinal cord, we can always assume what areas of the body are going to be affected. All right, so let's take a look at the white matter here. The white matter is divided into three different regions. You can see the posterior, the anterior, and the lateral. And each column here contains tracts. And those tracts are a bundle of axons, which are going to be used to obviously communicate and send impulses. So with these tracts, they're going to send either sensory or motor signals. It just depends on the length of those tracts. So the short tracts, they're going to carry those sensory and motor signals. And the longer tracts are actually going to connect the spinal cord with the brain. So we have two different tracks that we're going to look at. We have the ascending tracts and we have the descending tracks. So ascending, to ascend, you go up. So the ascending tracts are going to go from the spinal cord up to the brain, whereas the descending tracts are going to go from the spinal cord out to the body. All right, that's just a basic introduction to the spinal cord. We're going to get a little bit more detailed as far as the nerves go in the next day or so, and then we'll move on to reflex.